Wealth Attraction Research. Wealth Attraction Research. WAR. War. Manipulating prices. Wealth Attraction Research. WAR. War. Manipulating prices. You're listening to Wealth Attraction Research. WAR. War. Manipulating Prices, presented by Hakeem Alibokas Alexander on Spreaker, Social Podcasting, Wisdom, Social Audio Inc., and Callin, Social Podcasting. Presented for World Reading Club in association with Uniquilibrium and ExercisingYourMind.com. This edition's reading focus comes to us from The Little Book of Economics and How Money Works, both published by Dorling Kinserly, a compilation and a collaboration of various different contributors in the subjects of finance, money, economics. This will be just under an hour if I'm lucky, so I can get out of the Barnes & Nobles and then get back to my other work, the other business of being me. That's all I'll say about that. So this title, Manipulating Prices, comes from both books. Interestingly enough, they line up pretty well. From The Little Book of Economics, the chapter this section is called Prices Come from Supply and Demand. And from How Money Works, it's Manipulating the Stock Market. So I'm pretty sure that both these are going to have some similar features, as they are indeed related. So from The Little Book of Economics, Prices Come from Supply and Demand. In context, the focus, we have theories of value. The key thinker that will be highlighted here is Alfred Marshall, born 1842, died 1924. Before his time, at around 1300, Islamic scholar Ibn Taymiyyah publishes a study of the effects of supply and demand on prices. In 1691, English philosopher John Locke argues that commodity prices are directly influenced by the ratio of buyers to sellers. 1817, British economist David Ricardo argues that prices are influenced mainly by the cost of production. 1874, French economist Leon Walras studies the equilibrium or balance in markets. And after that time, in 1936, British economist John Maynard Keynes identifies economy-wide total demand and supply. All right, so a few key figures here. This particular section is a little bit longer than the others, but thankfully not too much longer. It's 4 pages instead of 2. And let's take a look at what we have before first, I've already heard of at least David Ricardo, Leon Walras, and John Maynard Keynes. So they're all economists. 2 British, 1 French. Let's see what it says here. It says supply and demand are among the fundamental building blocks of economic theory. Definitely that is so. That's probably what you learn in basic economics classes if you've ever taken them. The interplay between the amount of a product available on the market and the eagerness of consumers to buy that product creates the foundation of markets. So the interplay between the amount of a product available and the eagerness of consumers to buy that product creates the foundation of markets. All right. Let's take a look at what that looks like here. Well, I have a graph. You can't see that if you're not on Callin. But let's see. We have the graph. So this graph is known as the Marshallian cross. I guess that must be named after, didn't I read somebody here named Marshall? Yeah, Alfred Marshall. So this graph, known as the Marshallian cross, shows the relationship between supply and demand. The point at which the supply and demand curves intersect gives us the price. All right. Which is also labeled as equilibrium and price equilibrium. And quantity. So you got quantity equilibrium and price equilibrium. Supply and demand. All right. It's good to see that visually. The importance of supply and demand in economic relationships was studied as long ago as the Middle Ages. The medieval Scottish scholar Duns Scotus recognized that a price must be fair to the consumer, but must also take into account the cost incurred in production and therefore be fair to the producer. I think this is a part that a lot of people miss out when they complain about prices. Yes, there is a lot of markup, but how else would they make a living? Just like how you go to work and have a job and get paid wages, well, business owners have to make profits because that's their job, right? Subsequent economists studied the effects of supply-side costs on eventual prices, and economists such as Adam Smith, there he goes again, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, and economists such as Adam Smith and David Ricardo linked the price of a product to the labor required in its production. This is called the classical labor theory of value, which I think still should be factored into things like that. They are in dollar amounts, but those are a little bit different from the labor theory of value, at least from my understanding of Adam Smith, which I will admit is not that great. Continuing. In the 1860s, new economic theories began to develop, challenging these ideas under the banner of the neoclassical school. This school of thought introduced the theory of marginal utility, where the satisfaction a customer gains or loses from having more or less of a product affects both demand and price. British economist Alfred Marshall joined the analysis of supply with the new neoclassical approach to demand. Marshall saw that supply and demand work in tandem to generate the market price. His work was important because he illustrated the varying dynamics of supply and demand in short-term markets, such as those for perishable goods, as opposed to long-term ones, such as for gold. He applied mathematics to economic theories and produced the Marshallian cross, a graph showing the supply and demand as crossing lines. The point at which they intersect is the equilibrium price, which perfectly balances the needs of supply, the producer, and demand, the consumer. All right, that makes sense so far. Basic economics, right? All right, basic economic theory, the foundation of markets. Continuing, the law of supply. The amount of products a firm chooses to produce is determined by the price at which it can sell them. If the assorted costs of production, labor, materials, machines, and premises, amount to more than the market is willing to pay for the product, production will be seen as unprofitable and be reduced or stopped. If, on the other hand, the market price for the item is substantially more than the cost. If, on the other hand, the market price for the item is substantially more than the cost of production, the company will seek to expand production to make as much profit as possible. The theory assumes that the firm has no influence over the market price, and must accept what the market offers. For example, if the cost of producing a computer amount to $200, production will be unprofitable if the market price of the computer drops under $200. I would also say, of course, it's obvious if it is equal to $200, right? There's no profit there. But canceling out. Conversely, if the market price of the computer is $1,000, the firm producing it will seek to produce as many as possible to maximize profits. That information there caused me to just think. I've seen laptops for a couple $100, right? And if they're like $200, can you imagine how little it costs to produce them? Interesting. Computers for 200 bucks. Some decent ones too. Seen some touchscreens ones. All right, so the law, okay, yes. So the law of supply can be visualized using a supply curve, where every point of the curve provides the answer to how many units a firm will be willing to sell at a particular price. Furthermore, there must be a distinction between fixed and variable costs. All right, there's a little flowchart of bubbles here. Let's see what the first one says. Producers supply goods to the market to meet consumer demands, which goes then next. If goods are not supplied in large enough quantities to meet demand, prices rise. Next, supply is increased. Producers make more to satisfy demand. Next, however, at some point, supply surpasses demand. At this point, prices begin to fall. Then, until the market settles at a price that balances supply and demand. In conclusion, prices come from supply and demand, which is the title of this chapter in the Little Book of Economics. I'm going to continue here. Furthermore, there must be a distinction between fixed and variable costs. The above example assumes, the example that I just read, with those bubbles going one to the next, that little flow. The above example assumes that production can be increased with the unit cost of production remaining stable. The production can be increased with the unit cost of production remaining stable. However, this is not the case. If the computer factory, oh no, he's not talking about, they're talking about the computer price. Well, these bubbles are sitting right on top of that. Cold reading. All right, so, yeah, so if the above example assumes that production can be increased with the unit cost of production remaining stable. However, this is not the case. If the computer factory can produce only 100 machines per day, yet there is demand for 110, the producer must judge whether it makes sense to open a completely new factory with the vast additional costs this incurs, or whether it makes more sense to sell the computers at a slightly higher price to reduce demand to only 100 per day. The nature of demand. Well, that makes sense, right? Nothing too complicated so far, right? I'm understanding it, so you must be understanding it. The nature of demand. The law of demand sees matters from the viewpoint of the consumer rather than the producer. When the price of a good increases, demand inevitably falls, except for essential goods such as medicine. This is because some consumers will no longer be able to afford the item, or because they decide that they can gain more enjoyment by spending the money elsewhere. Using the same example as previously, if the computer cost only $50, the volume of sales will be high since most people will be able to afford one. On the other hand, if it costs $10,000, the demand will be very low since only the very wealthy will be able to afford them. As prices increase, demand falls. There is a limit to how low prices can fall to stimulate demand. If the price of the computer falls to below $5, everyone will be able to afford to buy one, but nobody needs more than 2 or 3 computers. Consumers realize that their money is better spent on something else, and demand flattens out. Price is not the only factor that affects demand. Consumer tastes and attitudes are also a major factor. Yeah, I know that's for sure, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that I do not buy at all just because of the fact that, it doesn't make sense to me, right? I don't buy a lot of the name brands that most people do because I think that they're stupid. Not that the people are stupid, I think that the brands are stupid, like Nike and Adidas and those things that people go crazy about because basketball players or some other person that they've seen very oftentimes that you call celebrities are wearing them. or like all that other crazy shit that people like to wear. But I digress. Let me just continue reading before I rant too much. Lest not I rant. Price is not the only factor that affects demand. Consumer taste and attitudes are also a major factor. If a product becomes more fashionable, the whole demand curve shifts to the right. Right? So wait a minute. Let me look at this curve. What are you talking about? Shifts the demand curve shifts to the right. Oh, so demand goes up. Yes. Okay. So consumers demand more of the product at each price. Given the static position of the supply curve, this drives up the price. Because consumer taste can be manipulated through techniques such as advertising. What did Noam Chomsky call that? Manufacturing consent, right? So because consumer taste can be manipulated through techniques such as advertising, producers can influence the shape and position of the demand curve. And you didn't think that you could be hypnotized, did you? Don't you know that that's what advertising and marketing is to a large extent? The definition of hypnosis. And by the way, if you didn't know, I have a degree in clinical hypnosis from what I think is the best college of hypnotherapy in the world, the Hypnosis Motivation Institute. I do not earn any money from them, so by saying this, I just like to promote them. You can find them at hypnosis.edu. That's right, they're recognized by the Department of Education. And they now have an associate's degree program along with their professional clinical hypnotist program as well. Hypnosis.edu. Let's take a look. Yes, so because consumer tastes can be manipulated through techniques such as advertising, producers can influence the shape and position of the demand curve. Let's see, there's a quote here that says, wait, let me see, where's Alfred Marshall from again? Is he British? I don't know. I'm just going to assume he is. Oh yeah, he is. When the demand price is equal to the supply price, the amount produced has no tendency either to be increased or to be diminished. It is in equilibrium. Alfred Marshall. Continuing, finding equilibrium. So, while consumers will always seek to pay the lowest price they can, producers will look to sell at the highest price they can. When prices are too high, consumers lose interest and move away from the product. Conversely, if prices are too low, it no longer makes financial sense for the producer to continue to make the product. A happy medium must be reached, an equilibrium price acceptable to both consumer and producer. This price is found at the point where the supply curve intersects the demand curve, producing a price at which consumers are happy to pay and producers are happy to sell. By the way, that demand curve he's talking about is on this graph known as the Marshallian cross. Because what did Marshall do? He applied mathematics to economic theories and produced the Marshallian cross. All right. This price is found at the point where the supply curve intersects the demand curve, producing a price at which consumers are happy to pay and producers are happy to sell. What? Yeah, good. All right. Many factors complicate these relatively simple laws. What many factors complicate these many simple laws? The position and size of the market are crucial in price determination, as is time. The price at which producers are happy to sell is not just influenced by the cost of production. For instance, consider a market stall selling fresh produce. The farmer arrives having already paid for the costs of production, buying the seeds, the labor involved in planting and harvesting the crop, and his transportation to the market. He knows that to make a profit, he must sell each apple for $1.20. Therefore, at the start of the day, he decides to market his apples at $1.20. If his sales are going well, he may feel he can make more money and raise his price to $1.25. This may cause a slowdown in sales, but if he manages to sell his entire stock, he will be happy. However, if the end of the day is nearing and he finds that he still has quite a few apples left, he might decide to drop his price to $1.15 to avoid being left with an excess of apples that are likely to rot before his next chance to sell them. In this example, the costs of production are fixed, and the urgency of selling the crop is the pressing factor. This is useful in illustrating the differences between short and long-term markets. The farmer will decide how many apples to plant for his next harvest based on his sales this time. And in this way, the market should eventually arrive at equilibrium. Okay, note, I don't think that's going to happen. Really looking at a lot of stuff that shows that that history or the past is not always a good indicator of what's going to happen next. Except in, well, there's some great cases, you know, that foundation for the study of cycles with Dewey and Dakin, who basically they actually reverse engineered when they were looking at cycles, especially economic cycles. They found periodic ups and downs, you know, booms and busts that just so happen to be in alignment with specific celestial objects in the sky. Constellations, anyone? Astrology? And, you know, also Radio Corporation of America found that when planets were aligned at 0, 90, 180, and 270 degrees from each other, there were degradations in radio signals each and every single time. So that is a fascinating little tidbit right there. But let me continue before I get off target here a little bit too more. All right, so let's continue with this. Oh yeah, foundation for the study of cycles, but back to the book. Right, in this example, the costs of production are fixed. The urgency of selling a crop is a pressing factor. This is useful in illustrating the difference between short and long-term markets. The farmer will decide how many apples to plant for his next harvest based on his sales this time, and in this way the market should eventually arrive at equilibrium. I was about to say uniquilibrium. The farmer's market is also limited by distance. There is only a certain radius within which it makes economic sense to sell his product. For instance, the cost involved in shipping his apples overseas would make his prices uncompetitive with domestic producers. This means that, to some extent, the farmer is at liberty to set his prices slightly higher because his consumers cannot travel to seek alternatives. You know, just that thing just brought me right back to the sentence that said, because consumer taste can be manipulated through techniques such as advertising, producers can influence the shape and position of the demand curve. Yeah. This means that to some extent the farmer is at liberty to set his prices slightly higher because his consumers cannot travel to seek alternatives. Captive audience or captive consumers, right? That's what that is. I sip. Loudly. The opposite scenario to the fruit farmer is the market for a global commodity such as... I don't have my coins with me. I was going to drop the coin. All right. So the opposite scenario to the fruit farmer is the market for a global commodity such as gold. In this long-term market, the holder of the gold is under no time pressure to sell. He can be confident that it will maintain its value, which is questionable to me. Why the front porch does gold hold its value like that? I mean, look, yes, electronics, so on and so forth, but it's easier to mine than silver. Well, you know, a long time ago, you know, most of the empires back in the day used to, you know, the rulers were said to be gods themselves or descendants of gods, right? And then they got in the middle of bartering and trade because people were doing it. They were saying that this cowrie shell or this, you know, ball of dung or whatever it was they were exchanging represented or expressed so many units of wheat or a number of cows. But then, you know, these god men and women, some of them, decided that they were going to be the ones who literally coined the medium of exchange. And so they made coins of gold and silver because they were shiny and pretty. And people think that it's because they're rare, the metals. They're not. They were made rare through violence. People weren't allowed to, just like how at certain points in time, like for example in China, people weren't allowed to wear red and yellow, and then in other places in Europe, people weren't allowed to wear purple unless they were nobility or royalty, right? So people were actually stopped from, and even in the United States a while ago, did you know that it was illegal for individuals to own gold? You don't say. Yeah, it's true. Right, the opposite scenario to the fruit farmer is the market for a global commodity such as gold. In this long-term market, the holder of the gold is under no time pressure to sell. He can be confident that it will maintain its value. The larger the market and the more widespread the knowledge of the market, the more likely it is that the commodity has found its equilibrium price. This makes any small change in market price significant, and any change will spark a flurry of buying and selling. Although these examples introduce further complexity into the market, they hold true to the basic rule that suppliers will only sell at a price they find acceptable, while buyers will only buy at a price they find reasonable. Which reminds me of the book, The Psychology of Money, where he says that, wait, let me not mix it up, but basically, reasonable is greater than rational. Right? Is that it? Let me see, I think that's chapter 11. Reasonable is greater than rational? Yep, chapter 11. Reasonable is greater than rational. And it says, the subtitle says, aiming to be mostly reasonable works better than trying to be coldly rational. Continuing. The examples all relate to a market in which physical goods are traded, but supply and demand is relevant throughout economic reasoning. The model is applicable to the labor market, for instance. Here, the individual is the supplier, selling his or her labor, and employers are the consumers, looking to buy labor as cheaply as possible. Minimum wage, anyone? That's right. People are trying to get, I gotta get a high-paid job. But they don't want that. They don't want that shit. Right? So it's employers, right? Here, the individual is a supplier selling his or her labor, and employers and consumers looking to buy labor as cheaply as possible. Money markets are also analyzed as a supply and demand system, with the interest rate acting as the price. Interesting. Money markets are also analyzed as a supply and demand system, with the interest rate acting as a price. So I guess then if more people are wanting to take out loans, the interest rates would go higher, right? And if more people were just saving their money, the interest rates would go down. Right, that's right. Because they don't, as much as they can withhold, the bankers, or banksters, can withhold money from you and make more for themselves, of course, right? That's what everybody's trying to do, self-interest. But could that be the cause of all suffering if I modified that a little bit, like in Buddhism, right? The cause of all suffering is purely selfish desire. You can remedy that with the Eightfold Path. All right, so economists called Marshall's work partial equilibrium. Economists called Marshall's work partial equilibrium analysis because it shows how a single market reaches equilibrium or balance through the forces of supply and demand. However, an economy is made up of many different interacting markets. The question of how all of these can come together in a state of general equilibrium is a complex problem that was analyzed by Leon Walras in the 19th century. Yay, done. But we have a focus on Mr. Alfred Marshall. All right, Alfred Marshall. Let's take a look. Born in London, England in 1842, Alfred Marshall grew up in the borough of Clapham before going to Cambridge University on a scholarship. There, he studied mathematics and then metaphysics, concentrating on ethics. His studies led him to see economics as a practical means of implementing his ethical beliefs. In 1868, Marshall took up a lectureship specially created for him in moral science. His interest in this continued until a visit to the U.S. in 1875 made him focus more on political economy. Marshall married Mary Paley, his former student, in 1877 and became principal of University College, Bristol, UK. In 1885, he returned to Cambridge as a professor of political economy, a post he held until his retirement in 1908. From about 1890 until his death in 1924, Marshall was considered the dominant figure in British economics. Cool, he had a degree in metaphysics, like Aristotelian metaphysics. As a matter of fact, Aristotle wrote a book called The Metaphysics, in which ethics was one of those things in there. All right, what were Alfred Marshall's key works? In 1879, The Economics of Industry with Mary Paley Marshall. And in 1890, Principles of Economics. And in 1919, Industry and Trade. Well, there you go. That's the little book of economics, where we learned a little bit about prices come from supply and demand. Supply and demand. All right, I'm just 31 minutes in and almost done here. And finishing it off with the most boring book of them all in my economic studies here is How Money Works. Because you can't see the pretty pictures. I can, but it's still boring as fuck. It's kind of not that exciting. It really isn't. But I gotta do what I gotta do. All right, this is titled Manipulating the Stock Market. That's, of course, again, where I get the title from. This was from the Little Book of Economics, right? Supply and demand. And this is manipulating the stock market, manipulating prices. Aren't they, like I said at the outset, I think that they're similar. We might see some similar ideas here. Let's take a look. Manipulating the stock market and how money works. Stock market manipulation can take many forms, such as artificially fixing prices higher or lower with the aim of interfering with the market for personal gain. Yeah, there goes that personal gain again. All right, how it works. Well, do tell. A trader can manipulate the market by processing a lot of small sell orders in an attempt to drive down the price of a share. This can cause other shareholders to panic and sell their shares, sending the price down even further. Conversely, a lot of small buy orders may push up a share price to convince other investors that good news is about to be announced. Market manipulation is highly unethical, but not always illegal. Ooh. Market manipulation is highly unethical, but not always illegal. Interesting. So there we go. There's a good old door into our wonderful predatory capital practices. Wow. All right. Let's see. Pushing share prices down. There's a little box. Large volumes. If a large investor sells off its stock, prices may fall. I like how they say if a large investor sells off its stock, right? Because an investor doesn't have to be a person, right? It can be an entity of some kind. An entity. You guys ever seen that movie Entity, where that lady was being assaulted by some kind of incubus or something like that? And it was supposedly, like a lot of those, based on a true story. And they trapped this thing, the entity, inside. They made a special chamber for it with, I think, what was it? What is that? Oh my gosh. You would think that I would remember this. It's Liquid nitrogen. Yeah, they trapped it in they used liquid nitrogen to freeze it for a moment, but then it, you know, well, I'll let you watch the movie. It's called The Entity, and it is from 1982. It's let's take a look online. It says, oh, this would be fun. Get an AI-powered overview for this search. Let's see what it says. Generating. The Entity is a 1982 American horror film about a single mother who is... Okay, that's enough. All right, so I'm not going to read the rest of that. That's beyond the topic of this reading and ranting. Okay, so large volumes. If a large investor sells off its stock, prices may fall because of an increase in supply. That same investor can then buy the stock back later at a lower price, having locked in profits at the higher price. Yes. Short selling. I want to look at that again. So large volume, and this is pushing share prices down. So large volume, if a large investor sells off its stock, prices may fall because of an increase in supply. That same investor can then buy the stock back later at a lower price, having locked in profits at the higher price. Oh, there you go. Pushing share prices down. Remember, market manipulation is highly unethical, but not always illegal. Next is short selling. Rogue traders. Why did I just think of pirates? Short selling. Rogue traders borrow shares that are sold at a high price. So rogue traders borrow shares that are sold at a high price, then manipulate the price down so that they can buy the shares back at a lower price to return to the original owner. Interesting. What the hell? That's really shady. Next, okay, so rogue traders borrow shares that are sold at a high price. You got these high priced shares. Then manipulate the price down, right? Maybe they selling them off, like the large volumes did, right, earlier. Then manipulate the price down so they can buy the shares back at a lower price to return to the original owner. Interesting. What? That is pretty shady. All right. Next is bad news. If a company issues a profits warning or a negative report, shares may fall in price. Okay, so those are things that pushing share prices down. Those are the things that are pushing share prices down. All right, we got a puppeteer over here, and on each of his sleeves, which his shirt is orange, it says trader. And on one side, stage right, which is my left, it says pushing share prices down. Sell now to the market. And then now we got the other side, pushing prices up. Buy, go for gold. All right, and let's see what that says. Pushing share prices up. So how do we do that? How do we push share prices up? Stock liquidity. In less liquid stocks, a relatively small number of buy orders can move the price up. In less liquid stocks, a relatively small number of buy orders can move the price up. This makes it easier to exaggerate price movements through manipulative trades, such as pump and dump, where a rogue trader encourages investors to buy shares, pushing the price up so they can then sell their own shares at a high price. Yeah, interesting. All right, so in less liquid stocks, a relatively small number of buy orders can move the price up, right? So if this one investor was holding on to it, right, or a trader was holding on to these shares, he could sell a relatively small or buy a relatively small number of them to make the price go up. This makes it easier to exaggerate price movements through manipulative trades such as pump and dump. Where a rogue trader, where a rogue trader encourages investors to buy shares, pushing up the price, or I'm going to say pumping it, right? Pushing the price up so that they can then sell their own shares at a high price, dump them Oh, so that's a pump and dump. Okay. Wow. This is some real shady. Like, that is fascinating. You would never think of these things, right? Unless you're a fucking criminal. Or, well, you don't even have to be a criminal to think about it. I'm sure you can think about these things, but you wouldn't actually do it. I mean, we can be criminally minded without being criminal and have without criminal actions. That sucks. And this stuff is done all the time, right? All right, good news. Last point here is good news. Posting positive information about a company or stock on a bulletin board or an investor chat room can encourage other investors to buy. So I guess that could be one way to pump it up. Pump it up. Pump up the jam, right? So they can pump it up and then dump them later at the higher price of the ones they hold. Hey guys, buy this. Start buying it, the prices go up, and then meanwhile they're getting everybody all hyped up about buying it, and then they sell it, they dump it, and make some money off of it. That's real schemy. I mean, how many times can you actually do that and still stick around, like without people knowing? I don't know. Seems pretty weird to me. All right. Warning. Posting negative or positive information. Investors often like to discuss... Posting negative or positive information. There should be a period there. Investors often like to discuss shares they own or are thinking of buying with other like-minded individuals on bulletin boards and investment forums. These can be a good source of investment ideas, but they can also be used by unscrupulous traders who post negative or positive information to inflate or deflate prices. All right. And finally, the last box I say for last for no specific reason, because it's not in any specific order I'm reading these things in this book, because these images are everywhere. It's awesome. It's like a kid's book on money. All right. Is it Libor, the LIBOR scandal? It's spelled L-I-B-O-R. The Libor. I'll call it Libor. The Libor scandal. All right. Manipulation can affect... Okay. Yeah, Barnes & Noble will be closing in 15 minutes. We know. Make your announcement already. Yes. We'll bring our selections to the cash wrap. I have way too many selections that have already been bought to the cash wrap long ago, Barnes & Noble. I will not be purchasing any more. All right, so the Libor scandal. Manipulation can affect other areas of the market as well. A recent example is the Libor rigging scandal. Libor is a benchmark rate that banks charge each other for short-term loans and is regarded as an important measure of trust between major global banks. The scandal involved traders at 10 firms, which the UK's Serious Fraud Office, of course you leave it to the United Kingdom to call an office, the Serious Fraud Office. It's called the Serious Fraud Office. It's serious. This fraud is serious. Serious fraud. All right, the scandal involved traders at 10 firms, which the UK's Serious Fraud Office alleged had conspired to manipulate the Libor benchmark between 2006 and 2010 in order to keep it artificially low. Wow. So Libor is a benchmark rate that banks charge each other for short-term loans. I know I learned about that somewhere before about banks lending money to each other. But Libor is a benchmark rate, and I'm assuming they're referring to the interest rate, right? So Libor is a benchmark rate that banks charge each other for short-term loans and is regarded as an important measure of trust between major and global banks. Okay, so again, the scandal involved traders at 10 firms, which the UK's Serious Fraud Office alleged had conspired to manipulate the Libor benchmark between 2006 and 2010 in order to keep it artificially low. So they're lending it to each other with the interest rates low. Wow, schemy. So there's basically, they might have just been passing money back and forth to each other, and then they were just keeping the interest rates low. So they're like, hey buddy, I know you need some money, but we're not going to charge you any high interest. But we're going to have to manipulate that Libor, that labor rate. All right, well, that's it. That's it for manipulating the stock market and how money works. And that will conclude this edition of Wealth Attraction Research. So, you've been listening to Wealth Attraction Research, WAR, Manipulating Prices, presented by Hakeem Alibokis Alexander on Spreaker Social Podcasting, Wisdom Social Audio Inc., and Call-In Social Podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with ExercisingYourMind.com and Uniquilibrium. This edition reading focus came to us from the Little Book of Economics. It's a little cute little book of economics and how money works. Of course, in the Little Book of Economics, I read, and you probably listened to it a little bit, right? You listen, you listen. Prices come from supply and demand, and from how money works, manipulating the stock market. And that's why we got the name Manipulating Prices. I gotta go. Well, I don't really got to, but I'm going to. I could hide in the bathroom in Barnes & Nobles and hang out here all night and just creep out after they close down and just read all the books I can. You guys ever seen Charlotte's Web, where that mouse, that rat was running around in like the carnival, and it was like smorgasbord, 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 and he got all fat and stuffed with food? That's how I'd be inside the bookstore. Be like hiding out in here, just getting high on books. All right, I gotta go.